living creatures. Okay? And in this case, primordial images refers to us as humans and the very earliest experiences of our self-aware ancestors, right? And this gets into kind of whether or not you believe in the notions of free will, right? And it taps into kind of things we don't really fully understand about the human mind. But for the purposes of what we're talking about, all of these primordial images express themselves in stuff like myths, religions, dreams, fantasies, and literature, right? That's why, since I've been with you all, I've been constantly saying this is a common trope in other cultures. This story is told in a different way in this culture, right? And the theory behind that, why the human experience seems to be so similar, regardless of where in the world you go, is because of this. And this idea of the collective unconscious. Okay? And these different primordial images, right? Those things that activate our collective unconscious and kind of pull us into this this sea of human memory, right? Things that we can't necessarily explain, but we resonate with. That image, that thing that creates the moment for us, that is the archetype. Okay? So archetypes exist independently of us in a certain way, and they are what basically activates that collective unconscious and allows this lived experience, this truth of the human experience to enter our minds. And that is Carl Jung and other Jungian psychologists' basic premise for literature and why literature works the way it does. Okay? Now, this isn't necessarily a 100% agreed upon theory, right? Different schools of thought oppose this, but for our purposes, this gives us, as students of literature, easy to use and concise frameworks that we can look at stories through. And by identifying the right archetype, we can learn a lot about a story and discuss what it's trying to. Okay. So, Carl Jung dies in 1961, and he informs this huge body of work, right? And it's kind of blending psychology and literary studies, right? And this gentleman, Mr. Joseph Campbell, who was a contemporary, so around at the same time as Jung, also a professor, but he is a literature professor, and he is reading what Jung and his colleagues are publishing about this stuff, and he taps into that method, and he basically constructs the idea of comparative literary studies, so comparing different works of literature using art. Okay, and he was the first to do this and apply it to mythology, so different cultural stories and myths around the world. Okay. He's also, like Yvaria mentioned, he's the person that penned the idea of the hero's journey. He's the first person who described that idea. We'll get into what that means. And so when we think about Joseph Campbell, he's basically bringing the theories and stuff that Jung and the psychologists were talking about and firmly applying it to literature. And he's wildly successful at that and is able to pull apart different myths and create these great studies on these different stories, really for the first time. Okay. So what is an archetype?
You could just go back.
Oh, yes. Well, let's review, okay? We have, as human beings, this collective unconsciousness, right? That seems to hold some kind of ancestral, inherited affinity for stories, right? And by experiencing different, different images, different primordial images, right? Also known as archetypes, we can, even without knowing a story in particular or the culture it comes from, we can identify certain familiarities in that story. That is the takeaway here. worth noting, a lot of these ideas have come under academic scrutiny. Like people are starting to like maybe disagree with them in certain ways and are trying to find a different solution. But like I said, for our purposes, as our entry point into textual analysis of different literary devices and stuff like that, archetypes make things a lot easier. And we can pull apart the problems with archetypes at a later date once we have these core analytical skills nailed down. Okay, that's why we're doing this. Okay, so what is an archetype and what different things can be archetypes? Okay, it's kind of on the edge here, but it seems to not cut off too much. So different things can be applied. Archetypes can be applied to different things. Okay, these could be stuff like pictures. Right? Different symbols, iconography. Right? The two most important ones for our purposes, though, are character types and plot patterns. These are the most common types of archetypes. Right? So before we continue, when we talk about a character type being an archetype and a plot pattern being an archetype, what could that possibly entail? Right? Can you think of any examples of a character type? Archetype, for example, besides the hero from the hero's journey that we talked about. Yeah, that would be a plot pattern, right? That's almost like a trope, right? Friends to lovers, right? So this idea that you have two people that are close, right? And through some experience, they realize that their affection for one another is more than just friendship, right? And they initiate a relationship. That is definitely archetypal. You're very.
Would a character type be like a hero, a villain, or a higher power or something like that?
Exactly, yeah. So character types would include stuff like heroes and villains. We might use the language protagonist and antagonist instead, right? But you also have things like, how familiar are you guys with King Arthur, the story of King Arthur? Okay. Do we recognize the character of Merlin at the very least? The wizard character, right? He serves as an advisory role to the hero, Arthur. He is Arthur's mentor. He's Arthur's guardian and keeps him on the straight and narrow for the most part. That is an example of a character type, right? Well, let's dig into some more specific examples here. So, like we talked about the hero, right? And Joseph Campbell, the guy who penned that book, The Hero's Journey, nails down the following characteristics for what makes an archetypal hero in a story. Okay? Campbell says doesn't matter the person's gender, hero could be male, female, or other, right? Not a big deal. The core principle of what makes a hero is that they exist in a world that is safe and secure at the start of the story. Okay? So the hero at the beginning of the story is not yet a hero, right? They're just an everyday person. Maybe they have some special quality, maybe they don't. Right? But they leave that safe world of their everyday life and they initiate a journey. Okay? They start a quest. And this journey doesn't have to be a physical one. They might not have to necessarily travel very far. It could be a spiritual journey, yes. Or it could be kind of like a kind of trip in their own mind that they emerge from that experience as a different person, right? And they leave their everyday safety and they enter, whether metaphorically or literally, a different world or a different part of the world that presents the hero or the would-be hero with different challenges and facing their fears. And by overcoming those challenges and overcoming those fears, the hero becomes a hero. Right? And usually after doing so, they secure a reward of some kind. Okay? So think about it in 4 steps. The hero is safe and secure at the beginning. There is a change, sudden or otherwise, to that safety and security. The hero goes on a journey and overcomes challenge and fear. And the hero secures a reward and is able to return to that world from before. Okay, so I'll draw it on the board here. So we have safety up here. We have a change. We have challenge. And we have reward. That's the cycle. And there's other steps along the way, but that's the core heroic loop, as it were. Okay, any questions about the heroic hero? And the concept of a hero. And worth noting, Joseph Campbell is the first to kind of invent the idea of a hero, because before Campbell, the idea of really rooted in Europe and in North America, in the idea of tragic Greek hero in ancient myth, right? Which was always a man who always had to die at the end of the story because of some fatal flaw. And that was what dramatists and literary scholars were working with for basically ever. Right? But Campbell, informed by Jung and the idea of an archetype, is able to say, wait, no, we're missing kind of the forest for the trees here. Right? The Greek hero is still a hero and fits into this archetype, but it's bigger than just that. It's bigger than just Oedipus and Perseus and Heracles, right? We've got all these other archetypal heroes. Can't fit into that mold, so let's try a different mold that is better applicable to other things. Okay. All right. So here are the steps of the hero's journey. Simplified here, and I already kind of called this. So they're forced to leave the security of home in some way. They receive a call to adventure or a quest. They initially hesitate and refuse the quest. This is important. Okay? If the hero had their way, they would stay home. How many of you guys have seen Star Wars? The original trilogy. So Luke Skywalker fits that to a T, right? What does he say to Obi-Wan when he says he needs his help to find Princess Leia? I can't leave. I have an aunt and an uncle, right? We're moisture fans. That's what we are. I can't go on this adventure. What happens that forces Luke to go on this adventure? Yeah, they get killed by the Empire, right? That is the call to adventure. Okay? And the overcoming of the fear of the quest. So, crucially, most often, and we can do the Star Wars reference as well. The hero has the guidance of an older mentor figure. In our case of Star Wars, that's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Right? In something like Harry Potter, for example, Harry has a lot of mentor figures in that first book. You have somebody like Hagrid, somebody like, Dumbledore assumes that role in the other books, I'm sure.
Take serious later.
Yeah, serious for sure. And then there's who was
And then like McDougal, Donegal as well, Tipping.
Yeah.
Serious isn't that
Yeah,
bad
so-
considering.
Remember, it's not a hard and fast one-to-one comparison. This is a loose framework. Okay? Crossing the threshold. What's a threshold?
We enter the new world.
Yeah, so a threshold is like a marking point between one room and the other, right? So our door has a threshold, right? That divides the hallway and the room. And the hero crosses that threshold into this world of danger and challenge, right? Yeah, like the bathroom, or at the end of the first, which one has the basilisk?
Yeah.
Is that the first one?
That's the second. As they go into
That's the second.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grace's upset.
So that's the crossing of the threshold. For Star Wars, for the Star Wars comparison, that would be Luke entering the Millennium Falcon
there?
and being taken into outer
Were you
space for the
there?
first time. Or you could argue with
Ah, I
something like the
forgot.
Death Star.
I forgot, and then wow. One time that you come,
So after crossing the threshold, the hero needs to do certain things in order to succeed, which is confront challenges and tests. They need to make alliances and comrades, and they might have to rescue somebody, right? Somebody that might help them or aid them in some way, or somebody they care about, right? And all of this builds up to this supreme ordeal, this idea of the quote-unquote innermost cave. Okay? So think at the end of the knight's quest, right? The knight must confront this rampaging dragon, right? That would be the supreme ordeal. Luke's supreme ordeal is battling the Emperor aboard the second Death Star in the sixth film. Or I guess third film.
Yeah.
The Emperor? No. Vader throws him off. He doesn't do anything.
Like forces lightning at him, so
He just dies. No, Luke just sits there and takes it.
Well, Luke is the incentive for Vader to realize he doesn't want his son to die at the hands of his master, right? So he's still the hero of the story, but you could argue that Vader is still is in some way.
No.
Because we have the second archetype we can talk about in a second here. And after the hero triumphs over this supreme ordeal, this ultimate challenge, they receive their reward, right? And this can be literally, in the case of the knight, the dragon's hoard full of gold, right? Or it can be something they never truly understood about themselves that is made clear, right? And it gives them inner peace, right? The idea of this reward is different depending on the needs of the story we're talking about, right? So in terms of Luke Skywalker's reward, he brings balance to the Force and peace to his family. Right? And he becomes a Jedi Knight like his father before, right? That's Luke's reward. If we don't talk about the sequels, because we're not going to talk about them because they suck.
What?
Who's Luke?
This is our hero's journey, okay? And as I was discussing this, and
Let me
giving
show you.
examples, I can imagine you were kind of retroactively applying this template to different stories that you have read in the past, right? These ideas should,
No.
even in discussing them, they should kind of channel that universal memory a little bit, right? So you can maybe start to tap into it. Okay. That's the hero's journey. Another major archetype here, I'm starting to lose my voice.
Do you know what that is?
Another major archetype
You don't know who that is? Did you see that
is
before?
this guys, I'm talking, please. This idea of the redemptive archetype. What does it mean to be redemptive or redeemed? I can't have my definition have the word I'm trying to define it. What does the redeem mean? Nolan.
when you make a
14 years of
mistake or do something wrong at your own fault and have to prove yourself
Your
worthy to
name.
yourself or others that you're able to overcome that mistake.
Exactly, that's a great definition, right? So this idea of an error or a wrong that has been committed, right, or a flaw in character, and the redemption is the act of overcoming that wrongness and becoming a better person for it, okay? So the concept of the redemption arc should be pretty familiar, right? That's kind of a meme nowadays, right? Like when a Twitch streamer does something wrong or whatever, and they come back after getting banned. So-and-so's redemption arc, right? So this is rooted in an archetype, right? So we have this idea of an overconfident or prideful figure, right? This jerk off, right? And they are in some way lacking some kind of moral character, okay? They might be prideful, they might be narcissistic, they might be cruel, right? And in some way they violate what we would consider to be morality or ethics, right? So our societal rules for what's good and what's bad, right, Tyler? I'm gonna try that, 1 second here. Let me see if I can go in and adjust the, oh, I can like move the text to that.
No,
Okay, let's try
just
that.
like
Yeah, it didn't work. All right, well, this way. Sorry, 1 sec. I'm gonna try something. Oh, I did. Okay, that's a little kind of small, but I'll read it aloud as we talk here. So this person, right? They violated some kind of moral or ethical law of humanity, right? And in looking for justification for their actions and seeking like confirmation that what they did was good and right, they instead have what is called an epiphany, right? A sudden realization. And in that realization, everything that they did before is now kind of flipped in their heads. They no longer think that those things were good and true. And the person going through that redemption arc experiences profound guilt. And how many of you guys have seen Avatar: The Last Airbender? So who's the redemptive arc character in that show? Prince Zuko. All right, he's my favorite kind of example of this archetype because his redemptive act, like he has to go through multiple redemptive acts in order to assume the role of a companion of the main hero, right, or even a hero of himself, right? And this common theme in the redemptive arc is this idea of forgiveness, not only of the self, but of others. Right? And the redemption is not complete until another character redemption. Okay? That is when the arc kind of culminates and concludes. I think he did too. Let's think about what role Katara plays in the story. Katara's a waterbender, right? The waterbenders of the Southern Water Tribe were exterminated by the Fire Nation. And to Zuko, Katara is like a walking manifestation of not only his guilt, but his entire people's guilt, right? God, that show is so good.
I know, right? I watched it like 3 times.
Okay, we're gonna just quickly go through some more of these, okay? So other different archetypal stories. The concept of a savior, right? Who's the most famous archetypal savior in the world? Jesus Christ, right? That's an archetype, right? So the savior has followers and disciples. They stand against some kind of evil or injustice, and they are persecuted, against the moral standards. Or they're persecuted for having moral standards, I guess is the way of putting it. And after they are destroyed or otherwise defeated, they are so morally righteous that they live on after death, either literally or figuratively. Okay? So that's our savior archetype. The sinner saint archetype is another one. Here we have an individual who's deeply flawed or maybe has a loose moral compass. Right? They're indifferent, they're self-centered, they're kind of just focused on survival. Right? Their experience, right? They encounter some other character who is not. They're moral, they're righteous, they have a purpose, right? And through that relationship, through that dynamic, right, the sinner redeems themselves and finds purpose in what they do, whatever that might be. Right, so similar to the redemption arc, but this redemption is kind of rooted in the relationship between the sinner and the saint, fundamentally. In a way the other archetype was not. Right, and it usually, like it says at the end there, involves some kind of act of sacrifice, and that what symbolizes the final transition from sinner to saint. We don't need to copy this down. Okay, so the hero's journey, right, that's a plot pattern archetype. There are different kinds of archetypal journeys, right? Common one we might see in literature, a journey in search of some kind of knowledge, whether it's forbidden or forgotten or something like that. That's a common archetypal journey. We have this idea of the tragic quest, where somebody is traveling and performing penance. What is penance? I'm being penitent, or I'm going through penance. What am I doing?
Penance. Let me see. Let me see.
Not penne like the pasta.
I know the other
Penance.
side.
Oh,
Oh,
So
This
think
one's
of
easy.
penance as
let me try.
so. The word penance comes from the Christian tradition, and being going through penance or being penitent is seeking forgiveness. Right? When you're being penitent, you're asking for forgiveness. If you've ever seen the Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade, Indy has to go through this trap in this ancient ruin where only the penitent man will pass, and he's repeating the Bible verse to himself that comes from, and he kneels just when a saw blade goes to like slice his head off. Right? So by kneeling, he's being penitent. Right? And in this case, kneeling before the Christian God, but we can be penitent in other ways too. right? A lot of Greek stories fall under this idea of the tragic quest. The fool's errand, so this fundamentally flawed or ridiculous conception or journey that will not be successful in the end. A fool's
Let me
errand
try that.
is
Why not?
usually a tragic story as well. It's usually characterized by overconfidence.
Would
Why are you
Jesus
playing
walking
class?
the
Finish.
40 days and 40 nights
Finished.
count as
You're not.
Yes, so Jesus, and again, we talked about whether or not literally 40 days, 40 nights, right? That symbolizes a length of time, right? A longer length. And that was a exercise of self-denial, right? Jesus went into the desert specifically to be tempted, right? He was challenging his own moral character, right? And his belief that all things come from the Lord, right? That was the purpose of that trial, for better word. And by emerging from the desert, Jesus emerges as like a truly saintly figure, right? That's kind of like it's a journey in search of knowledge, I think. And Jesus leaves the desert with the knowledge that he can resist temptation. And then we have these other examples. The quest to rid the land of danger, right? The knight slaying the dragon. Right? The Grail quest. So this comes from Arthurian legend, the quest for this idea of the Holy Grail, which is a symbol of human perfection, a perfect knight, right? Which symbolizes all that's good and true and righteous. Lots of different examples of archetypal characters and archetypal journeys. Okay? The important thing we can do is be aware of that these exist, and try to define the stories we read by these things.
Chess. Quick chess.
Sorry about that, guys.
Oh.
Okay. So we have here this idea of 7 basic literary plots. So when we discuss literature, most plots, so how stories progress from start to finish, can be defined by the following categories. Okay? We have this idea of overcoming a monster, right? Whether that monster is a literal beast or a person that is so monstrous they no longer seem to be human. Right? We have this rags to riches story, right? This story of success and enlightenment. We have the quest, which lacks a caveat there, but you can imagine the quest being charged with a duty or responsibility and seeing it through to its completion. The voyage and the return, right? I like this trope because it can be both epic, right? Something like the Odyssey, or it could be comedic, something like, someone that goes out on a voyage, experiences something either epic or farcical, ridiculous. Pardon me? Monty Python, yeah, the Monty Python, the Holy Grail would be a great voyage. Because I don't think how does it end? Don't they like run out of budget and get arrested by the cops? Get arrested. The idea of the literary comedy, right? So Shakespeare's comedy plays fall under this category, right? How many of you guys have read *Midsummer Night's Dream*? A decent amount. Okay. That's a hard one to read first. I don't know why they do that first. But that falls under this archetype, right? So we have this idea of budding romance, right? And I'm sure as young people you can relate to like the pardon my French, the shit show that can entail. Right? Think Demetrius and who are the other characters? And Helena, right? In *Midsummer Night's Dream*. You have this concept of the reversal, right? So the unexpected changing of roles, right? And you have this, and through all the ridiculousness, you have this positive entity. I think the Hallmark sitcom ending where they like the heroine and the love interest like kiss under the Christmas tree or whatever.
Oh, that's Hallmark.
Right? Isn't it?
It's all like
Sorry.
I own a comic shop. I'm so I watch them.
Hello.
So we have this comedy. On the flip side, on the other side of the coin,
Hello.
you have the tragedy, right? The classical tragedy. Despair, death, and a fundamentally cautionary
Hello.
against
Hello, what's up, what about?
of behavior. All of Shakespeare's most famous plays are.
Hello.
You have Macbeth,
But
which is the
yes, it's very nice.
ruining the mortals and
Mhm.
everything that they hold dear. You have Hamlet, which is agitation and inaction will result in destruction.
Destruction.
You have King Lear, where putting
Yeah, so
someone
what was
in
it?
the wrong people will
So-
ruin you.
Yes, true, it's very funny.
You have, Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar is good.
Often seek your
Julius Kaiser. Julius Kaiser.
They
Julius Kaiser.
recommend not indulging certain parts of the human character.
Yes.
Julius Caesar, yeah, their closest allies often seek your most ruinous downfall. That's what I said. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the savior, sinner, saint dichotomy, but this plot, guys, we're almost done. This idea of rebirth, right, is very common among certain types of stories, right? Through redemption, right? This falls under the redemption arc as well, right? A character can be reborn, either literally or figuratively, and experience like deep emotional catharsis. That's a good word, actually.
The word.
When we say catharsis, how many of you have seen catharsis before?
Nobody at all. Not a single human being in this room.
To be catharsis, or to go through catharsis, excuse me, is to experience a deep emotion, right? And usually that emotion is kind of bittersweet, right? So catharsis might be something that's hard to hear, but you needed to hear it to kind of move on with your life, right? It's this tension and resolution of powerful emotion. Okay? Most tragedies deal in catharsis.
Kind of like if your dad abandoned you, and then you think back, you're like, I wish I would have abandoned you, and then you're at closure.
Yeah, and like in
That's not happening.
in the literary trope, we might say something like a parent abandons you, they return to your life, and you start to make amends, but then that parent dies. Right? That would be catharsis.
All my friends are fine.
What's this? So let me show
Do you
you
see the
this.
drama in that sequence though? That's what the purpose is.
More like very talented. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So fundamentally, all of those plots, all of those
Show
different
me.
stories, they don't, like I mentioned, they don't have to exist like one for one, beat for beat, in every given example, right? We as writers or as readers, we can manipulate those stories and those tropes, right? And as readers, we need to keep our eyes out when those ideas intersect, right? When they diverge, and keeping in mind all these different possible frames, right? Looking at these stories. Tyler, you have one? Okay. So we have some examples here, right? You can read those if you want. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking, so I'm not gonna describe those in super detail. I can go back to this slide a little bit. Oh Lord, we got a lot left. Okay.
Take a break and do it tomorrow.
Oh, we might have to.
How many slides have we through?
14.
How many are
Let's
there?
just keep going and then.
Alright, note about this, I need to rest my voice first. So,
Do we need
I'm not
to-
Do some yoga.
Steve, I'm sleeping.
yeah, do some stretching if you need to, guys. We've got 15 minutes till.
Oh, I haven't stretched like 2 weeks.
I should stretch more because my body's literally falling apart.
Yeah.
My ankles, both of my ankles are falling. And I can use my left hip, my right arm just shakes for like no reason. I swear I have. I have
It's like the dark side of the-
I have to all over my head. It's painful.
And it's bad. Like I'm not gonna
Keyword out. Keyword out.
I have to- Okay, that's fine. I think I pronounced.
I used to. All I could just. I used to be able to.
Do your best.
I can't do
Okay. This
Dead.
is too much.
I heard the hip crack.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Well, I'm not sure. At least
Molly's like a
you-
realist.
Yeah, I can make it.
Oh, it's so accurate.
Yeah.
Molly
Uh,
is missed.
not, I don't think you can do that if we have stars. All right, so finish up what you started in terms of your note taking for this. I'll leave a note for this up where we left off. We're going to change gears for the last little bit of class here. Give us a little break from talking about it. Any questions at all about any of the stuff we talked about?
I like the part where we talk about after
Me too.
Just watch it. It's my favorite. You watched it, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I've talked about it. Because I was like asking everyone to watch it.
Were there any others? That were like
We had the game literally after we watched. It's not a bug.
Serbia being defended nation.
I'm
And England and
Okay. With the time we have left to us today, guys, what we're gonna ask you to do is we're gonna put away our archetype stuff. We'll address it. Not we. You will address it at a later date. What we're gonna do instead for the last 15 minutes, we're gonna do a little bit of Bible reading. Okay. So, you'll need to access a device. I'll give you the Bible verse we're looking for.
we need to go to the
There's no, I got it.
Oh. I still have it. I already asked her.
Could I just read off your phone? Yeah.
Justification. Justification. Frank, stop changing your wallpaper in class. Please play some Genshin Impact. So yeah, you play that game. Play it now. Okay. Hmm?
So, I'm gonna turn the lights on.
Let me see what your game looks like.
What you're gonna do for me? Anybody need any of this still?
Wait, I will take a picture first.
Okay.
Wait, where's my
I'll
camera?
put it over.
Just a second.
Quick, Frank, quick.
Okay.
All right. Going. All right. So you're going to go to this website.
That's really loud.
Your game play.
Bible Gateway.
Yes. BibleGateway.com. And you're going to read.
What? What's this, Frank? What's this?
Okay. Notably, make
Frank.
sure you access
Frank,
the
who's
new
this?
internet.
This
You're
is
gonna read-
Frank, look. It's your favorite game.
Read Genesis chapter 10, also called the Tablet of Nations.
Beginning of this year.
So wait.
Whoa, whoa, Frank, look, it's fire. Frank, go. It's your favorite game.
Yeah, but which song is that? Yes, I mean.
Yeah, they're all
I love how there's Japhethites, Hamites, and Semites.
That's the only thing.
Wait, what? Why
Oh,
is it
like
Hamites?
school, like school
What a name.
Oh,
Wait, was it Kush?
why? Do I have a picture? I do.
Guys, it's so bad.
Wait, completely cut off.
Does everyone?
I don't know, but I have a picture at Edsby now, and so
I
Wait, just
have one
picture.
right here.
Oh.
I don't know. Some people have them.
Fergus, your pictures on Ensby look so funny.
Oh, yeah, there's a picture.
Oh, Bella, you made a picture.
What the heck is this?
What did you
story?
say? We went to say something way back?
Guys, we all have
This
neck.
story.
He almost just said a bad word. I'm gonna end the stream now.
Yeah, well, I have a picture.